There is a strange paradox at the heart of medieval prisons. They were not built merely to hold the guilty. They were built to control the living and preserve the power of the dead. Imagine walking through a fortress where every stone watches you, where corridors narrow without warning, where light is rationed like food. These were not just rooms with locked doors. They were architectural machines engineered for control and survival. Survival for the prisoner, barely. Survival for the regime, absolutely. In places like the Tower of London, punishment was not always the goal. Containment was. Psychological domination was. The architecture itself became the jailer. Why build walls 10 feet thick when a door would do? Why carve spiral staircases so tight they force you to turn right, exposing your sword arm? The answer is hidden in fear, in politics, and in the constant threat of rebellion. Medieval prisons were laboratories of human behavior, constructed during an age when rulers knew that power was fragile. And once you see how these spaces were designed, you begin to realize something unsettling. The prison was not separate from society. It was a reflection of it. To understand medieval prisons, you have to step into a world where law was inconsistent and punishment was often immediate. Early medieval Europe did not rely heavily on long-term incarceration. Fines, exile, or execution were more common. But as cities expanded and monarchies centralized power, holding prisoners became politically necessary. Yet over time, that third function grew increasingly important. The Norman White Tower, built under William the Conqueror, was designed with massive walls, not only to repel invaders, but to intimidate subjects. Dungeons were often retrofitted into basements, gatehouses, or towers. By the 12th and 13th centuries, as legal systems matured, imprisonment before trial became more common. You know what that meant. Architecture had to adapt. Cells were carved into stone, iron rings embedded into walls, narrow slits cut for ventilation that doubled as defensive arrow loops. In places like the Tower of London, high-profile prisoners were held in relative comfort, while common captives languished in dark pits. Prisons became layered spaces, reflecting social hierarchy as clearly as any royal court. Now, imagine you are designing a prison in the 13th century. You have no electric locks, no cameras, no reinforced steel. What do you rely on? Stone, geometry, and psychology. First, you position the prison inside a fortress, never isolated. That way, it shares defensive walls and garrisons. Next, you build vertically. Towers like those in the Tower of London used height as control. Prisoners placed in upper chambers faced exhausting stair climbs, guarded at every turn. Then you narrow the staircases, spiral them clockwise. Why clockwise? Because most attackers were right-handed, and turning inward restricted their sword swing. You embed iron rings directly into stone blocks, making shackles part of the architecture itself. Ventilation is minimal, just narrow slits to prevent escape, but allow enough air to avoid mass death. Too many deaths could spark unrest. Floors are uneven, discouraging stable footing in a fight. Doors are reinforced with oak and iron bands, hinges hidden to prevent tampering. Even the placement of latrines is strategic, often leading to external chutes that eliminate tools or waste build-up that could aid escape. Every element serves dual purposes: security and survival. It is design stripped to its raw function. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. What is fascinating is how many of these medieval principles still shape modern secure architecture. Control through layout remains fundamental. Modern prisons use sight lines instead of arrow slits, but the idea is identical. Visibility equals power. Restricted movement through narrow corridors echoes those spiral staircases. Even today, architects design spaces to guide behavior subtly. Think about airports, banks, or data centers. You are funneled, observed, contained. Medieval builders understood something profound. You do not need constant force if your environment does the controlling for you. There is also a survival lesson here. The thick stone walls of medieval prisons provided natural insulation. In winter, they retained heat from small fires. In summer, they stayed cool. Passive climate control, you might call it. Modern sustainable design is rediscovering thermal mass for energy efficiency. Even the redundancy of gates within gates mirrors cybersecurity firewalls. Layered defense is not a new invention. It is ancient wisdom carved in stone. By studying these old fortresses, we see that architecture is never neutral. It shapes behavior, preserves power, and, when done well, conserves resources. The medieval prison becomes less a relic and more a blueprint. Inside medieval prisons, architecture was not decoration. It was domination engineered in stone. Yet it was also survival engineering, balancing cruelty with pragmatism. Rulers needed prisoners alive for ransom, interrogation, or political leverage. So they designed spaces that controlled without constant supervision. Think about that. Walls that think for you, staircases that defend themselves, air slits that breathe just enough. These structures whisper a hard truth about human history. Power is often maintained not by visible violence, but by invisible design. And as we move through our own modern cities, surrounded by surveillance systems and controlled spaces, the legacy of those medieval architects lingers. Their solutions to rebellion, escape, and climate were born of necessity, but they continue to echo in courtrooms, government buildings, even digital infrastructure. The prison was a microcosm of society's fears and ambitions. Understanding it means understanding how environments shape human behavior across centuries. If this journey into stone corridors and shadowed towers changed the way you see the built world, then there is always more history hidden in plain sight, waiting behind the next heavy door. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned